communities, and one of the special ones is Cloud Launch and Learn, because I'm also a core team member there, and we are trying to bring these sessions weekly to our audience. In addition to that, like in terms of speaking experience and stuff like that, it started uh, close to 5 years ago with SQL Saturdays and Give camps that I was participating. And the idea was to give back to the community, to share information and make other people powerful, or empower them to do their business using the Azure or Microsoft technologies. So in terms of myself, here on the left side, you see that my social accounts, you can connect with me just putting my name in LinkedIn or in a Twitter. You see my Twitter handle there. You can also please join and kind of check it out to find information about infrastructure as a code. And finally, I'm a founder of cloudmarathoner.com blog that you see there in the bottom. So I would say just check it out, see what's going on there. Usually I share information about Azure, and I hope you have the same interest here. Next, actually, what we will cover today, right? What we'll cover while we are unpacking this session, I would say we will start, of course, with what is Azure Bicep, to give you this firm foundation in terms of understanding what it is, where you can use it, and how to set it up. Then we'll look into the benefits and why you need to care about this new language that can help you in building infrastructure as a code. Then we'll look into productivity tips. What are the tools and what are the shortcuts that you can utilize from day one in order to be productive? And finally, we'll look into some updates on Azure Bicep language, as this language is still evolving and it doesn't have a stable version 1.0 yet. However, starting from the 0.3, the version that we have, it's already have a official Microsoft support. So you can open Microsoft support ticket if something doesn't work, and you will not get alone, meaning that you will get the help from official channel. And finally, we'll look into a number of demos in order to make sure that you see something that's actually working, and it is deploying our Bicep language into the Azure by showing us the Azure resources there. All right, so let's start with the simple. What is Azure Bicep? Azure Bicep, in a nutshell, is a domain-specific language, and the main purpose of it is to help you manage Azure resources by basically making sure that you codify them and you can reuse them across different environments. Then it comes as a transparent abstraction over ARM template. ARM is Azure Resource Manager, and this is the layer in Azure which actually controls all the client requests, RESTless HTTP requests that come to the Azure in order to manage those resources which are in your subscription. And again, Azure Bicep is a much simpler way to manage your Azure resources and create them and basically update them when you need it. And finally, Azure Bicep actually is a language, but it transpiles, meaning that it compiles in some terms into the ARM templates. And ARM templates have been there in Microsoft Azure ecosystem for the last, right from the beginning, I would say, that which is around from 2016, as far as I remember. Even it can go further to the times when it was just initiated. But what is ARM templates? You will see the example. It's a JSON description of the Azure resources, and it is not as human readable as Azure Bicep language. Now, before jumping further, I want to show this relationship between Bicep language, which is the Azure Resource Manager language to create the ARM templates, and the ARM template itself. So as we mentioned before, the ARM templates is the structure that you need to have before interacting with the Azure Resource Manager, the main layer from where all the management of the underlying resources happening. But before that, just writing ARM templates is very hard. It's a cumbersome, and there's a steep learning curve. However, the Bicep language is an abstraction on top of it, as you see here on the picture, right? It's an abstraction on top of ARM template that basically pass in this simple to understand Azure declaration of Azure resources and their connection, their relationships, so that it can get compiled into ARM templates, which is, again, it's a JSON code. Then that's get applied to the Azure Resource Manager. Before going, any further, it would make sense just go and look at this, right? Look at this. What is Bicep language code, how it looks like, and then how ARM templates are look like. And let's switch into the Visual Studio Code. But before switching to the Visual Studio Code, I want you to show you, and I'll put that in the chat actually. Let me find it where it is first. Here it is. So all the code that you would see here is actually in my GitHub repo. I brought my browser now, and basically this is the GitHub repo link, which you would find as a QCR code at the end of the presentation. I put that in the chat so you can get it from there. But feel free to give it a follow and check the check this information. Awesome Azure Bicep, where you can, I'm going to come back to that. It's a great collection of the Azure Bicep resources that where you want to start from. And secondly, all the code that you would see today, they are all checked in and exist in this Learn Bicep. Make it a little bigger so it's visible in this Learn Bicep folder. So repository, sorry. So if you go to Learn Bicep repository, all the code and everything is here, and you have some pipeline that's actually building it from the deployment branch, and as well as you have these articles from my cloud marathoner blog that you can actually look into and implement certain things. And there's instructions how to use that. I'm not going to go through that, but hey, go and check this repo. I'll put that in the chat. Again, everything is there. So before jumping into this repo, so I showed that to you. Next thing I want to show is bring our Visual Studio Code, right? So as you see, this is the same repo there. And when you see it, you would see that it's organized into folders. But here I'm going to create a new folder. Okay, let's come here, click it somewhere here. Okay, and then let's create a new folder. And let's give the name of the event. It's a LATAM 2022 session. All right, that's our folder. And then we are going to create a first Bicep template, a Bicep language code. To do that, we would create a new file, and then we'll give a very simple name. We'll call it sample bicep. That bicep will make sure that it's a bicep. And you see there is actually, let me actually make sure I can zoom into that. Sorry, I have to bring my zoom in software online, so it's actually cooperate with us. Zoom, where it is? Okay, zoom it. Here it is. Okay, sorry for that. So basically what I was trying to say just the moments before, you see this ARM template. This is actually an extension that I'm going to show you that you need to install in order that to happen. And what it does basically recognize this file and infrastructure. So here, once we are in this sample file, we will start with the basic thing that you can do in Azure, which is let's start with a storage account. And of course, you can start with saying resource and then press on a tab, and there's like nice autocomplete where you can set this resource. But what I'm going to do is actually I'm going to use this. I'll type res.storage and then click on it. Then you can set the storage account name, and you can say, you can keep it as is. Then name of the storage account, of course, needs to be unique, and you can give the name LATAM 2022, your initials, and make sure that it's a unique name, right? So let's put some numbers there. Then location is actually needs to be defined. Then we have a storage type, and then the SKU. The one that's premium is okay if you are doing for production, but for your local development standard, locally redundant would be much more cheaper. So you see we have a red actually squiggly line here. Let me make it a little bigger, the screen here. We have this red squiggly line, which means there's something wrong. This is wrong because we need to add this location as a parameter. Let's do that. So this is red, and it can't resolve it automatically at the moment, but I believe Azure Bicep team probably will do that one day. But we can type here param and define our location parameter. Okay, let's make it string. And if you want to set a value, you can say, okay, let it be in East US, and you can put the region that's most close to you. You see, it's almost done here. We don't have any squiggle lines except this one, which requires some description here. Hey, you know, we are missing something here. So if you want, you can put that description and say that this is something actually, it's an Azure region, right? That's what we are intending to use that for. So now everything is gone, and we have our valid Azure Bicep code, which describes a simple storage with the name that you see here. However, you know, this is just understandable code, right? We have a resource storage account. This is the type of the resource. Okay, just to give you some heads up here. Next, you see the version, the version of this resource. As you know, each resource in Azure actually get versioned, and each new version usually brings new capabilities like new properties and features that you can rely on. In this case, it's using 2021. If you want to change that, it's possible. You just come here, all right, and you, after the @ sign, it should give you this autocomplete nice feature, right? So you can choose the latest, or you may want, if you want to roll back, you can choose something from previous version. Then other things are obvious. Now we have our Azure Bicep language code, but we didn't see ARM template yet, right? We didn't see it. So let me do it. If you want to see the ARM template, there are like two ways you can do. The productive way, I would say, is to use something that we have built in by Azure Bicep team, and it was a recent actually announcement, probably like 2 releases ago or so, 2 or 3. So you can actually right click on the file and say, okay, build Bicep file. And what it would do is basically it will take this Bicep language and transpile that into ARM template so that everyone can see what's the ARM template is. Let's do that. Let's click on build Bicep file. And what it does is basically in the same folder where we were here, as you see, it actually created another file with .json extension, which is ARM template representation of it. If I click on it, we would see that, hey, you know, here we have another file, which is much longer, by the way, right, than the other. But let's compare them. To do this comparison, I'm going to, you know, make sure that I can make it like this. No, let's take this out and duplicate this. Split down, split up, split to the right. Okay, that worked well. So what we got here is on the left side, we have code that describes, it's a minimalistic code, right? It's just 11 lines of code on the left side. And we see the storage account declaration. We see the parameter, which is our location, Azure region, where we want to deploy. And we see the storage name. On the right side here, we see the ARM template representation, the one that you have to write before Azure Bicep language was in place, which is basically defining the schema, which is again, this is a JSON representation of the same storage that you see on the left, but it has more metadata in it. For example, this metadata defines what was the Bicep language version and its unique hash that it generated from, right? Then we have parameter definition here, again, declared using the ARM JSON specifications. And then we have resource itself. And if you look at the resource, it's more or less kind of similar, except that you have more lines of code here, and the reference to the location is done in a different way. So there's like more parentheses and more lines of code you have to type in. But other than that, it's same, except that the type and version of that API is actually defined in a separate lines. And overall, whatever takes in ARM JSON to be defined as a 32 line, it's defined as 11 line on the Bicep language. So first productivity thing, or first thing out of the bat, is that it's much easier to write Bicep language code, and it's gonna be less lines of code and easy to maintain, because less lines of code means less bugs, right? Let's agree on that. Okay, let's close this here and come back to our presentation. So we show you this first demo where we made sure that everybody understand how the Bicep language looks like, where we define the code that actually describes the Azure resources, and what is the classic way that how it used to be in Azure Microsoft in Microsoft Azure environment, which is the case at the moment when you convert that into ARM template. Okay, next, let's go forward. So Bicep language benefits. So we just show a few benefits of this, but let's kind of count them down so that you have a very solid understanding why you would want to invest some time into this Bicep language. First, it's easy to understand and maintain, as you saw on this demo. Second, it has a day zero support, meaning that once this new feature of Microsoft Azure resource is released by Microsoft team, you can use that new feature in Azure Bicep language right away from day zero. You don't have to wait for anything. But that's not the case if you are using third-party infrastructure as a code tool, like, for example, Terraform. In Terraform, you need to wait for that new provider version of Microsoft Azure to be released before you can actually benefit that new feature of Azure resource. So day zero support. Second is transparent abstraction. We looked at that, how it is actually transpiled, and this is the abstraction over ARM template. Next, it has awesome tooling in Visual Studio Code. I will come back to that. You saw snippets of that with autocomplete. We saw these validations. We saw squiggle lines like yellow and red, which means one of them is warning. Probably other one is error, but we'll come back to that. Next, it has clean code syntax, as you saw on the sample. It has code reuse and modularity. That's what we are going to cover later today. It has deep integration with Azure. Of course, it's Microsoft Azure product, so that's not a surprise, but this is a differentiator, because if you are primarily serving your customers on Microsoft Azure environment, probably that's the thing that you want to use. Next, pre-flight validation. This is something very useful that I'm going to describe in the example, where we are going to use this Azure Bicep feature, which is also could be found on other third-party tools, but this pre-flight validation saves a lot of time by making sure that template, the code that we are trying to deploy, is actually in a good state and it is not going to fail in the middle of deployment. Next, it has no state management file like other infrastructure as a code tooling there, meaning that the state management actually happens. You don't have to maintain any external file in order to maintain the state of your Azure resources. And production support, it has been there from the version 0.3. Now we are in a version 0.8.9 or something like that. So we are coming to the almost version 0.9. So that support is there. You can rely on that from the familiar Microsoft support channels. All right, I hope that clarifies it. Here we see the ARM template logo. This is the robotic arm of Azure Bicep. So let's move forward. So Azure Bicep evolution, I kind of mentioned that it started in 2020 as an alpha version. It was announced, I believe, on an Ignite session. And then it starts its evolution, as you see on the right side. If you just go and install your Azure Bicep and run this command, you would see all the versions. But again, official support starts from the version 0.3. Now we are on the latest version 0.8.9, and the stable version 1.0 is expected later, hopefully this year. All right. So before actually jumping even further, I want to make sure that I clarify one thing, okay? And that is that Azure Biceps, actually, you can run it cross-platform. You don't need just to run that on a Windows platform. And that's another advantage, right? You can run it on the Mac, on the Linux, on the Windows, whichever flavor of the Linux you have. So if you want to learn how you can install and what are the installation process, Again, we have this awesome community powered and community run Azure Bicep repo that I would strongly advise everybody to have a look. And let me bring that again here while we are speaking about that. So again, go to the GitHub repo and please check this awesome Azure Bicep where you would have a lot of things. Okay, so out of the box, you would have this table of content officially from Microsoft, as well as community created articles, videos, podcasts, you name it. But this is awesome place to start your Azure Bicep journey, learn everything from the community or officially from the Microsoft. All right, let's go back here and let me see where we are. Okay, while moving forward in terms of installation, right, you will check it out, you can check it out yourself, but to run the Azure CLI, the Azure Bicep in your command line interface, again, to run the Azure Bicep in your Azure CLI command line interface, you want to make sure that the version that you are targeting is actually 2.20 or above. If it is something that you didn't update in last year or so, you want to make sure you check that box and update your Azure CLI tooling. Second, which is actually Azure CLI is a cross-platform. And if you are a PowerShell guy and you want to provision and use the PowerShell for that, then you need to use PowerShell Core, or it needs to be a version 5.6 or above. Again, you need to make sure that those versions are checked and your environment is good enough to start your Azure Bicep play or have a playground to do some testing with that. Okay, if you are not a instruction following guy, but you are more visual guy, then I would say that if you are more visual person, not the guy, but person, then I would strongly advise to check this Azure Bicep First Look video course, because that's the place where everything actually run from the beginning. And let me just bring that on the slide here, and I will put the link there in the chat so that moderator can put it there. But this is the link. So I hope you have a LinkedIn subscription. You just subscribe for it. It has more than 2,000 learners here. It has chapter quiz and stuff like that. Check this out. And sometimes I actually share this for free for certain time of, usually it's maybe a day or two, where LinkedIn allows that for anyone to access, who have a LinkedIn account and make it work for them. All right, so check this Azure Bicep First Look on LinkedIn platform for visual learning. Next, Visual Studio Code and the Bicep configuration file. Let me see, and we will have a demo right after this one. Okay, so Visual Studio Code and Bicep configuration file is very important set of tools that you want to put in place. And why Visual Studio Code? Because it will come with Bicep config file, which I'm going to show you right now. Next, what you need to know about that, let's look into that, how it will organize your files, and plus it has analyzer built in, and what are the default configuration of this Bicep configuration file. So I'm going to switch back here, and I'm going to remove this sample from our folder. And here, if you scroll down, look into the bottom of this, you see Bicep config JSON. So what it is, basically, it's a custom configuration you can add into your Bicep deployments. And as you see, it's given here. It has some cool features, like you can, for example, if you want to make sure, let's say one of the requirements when you develop your Azure infrastructure is that there should be no hard-coded environment URLs. Okay, this is like very hard requirement that you want to make sure you meet. Then what you want to make sure is that you put that level into error. So when you put that into error, but be careful about that, what will happen here is that if somebody put hard-coded URL, your Bicep code would not compile and it will give error. Okay, it will say, hey, something wrong, check it. So let me show you what I mean by that. So each level comes with three, there are like three options you can choose how you want that to be corresponding. Error would make sure that compilation doesn't happen and you cannot deploy that code, that Azure resource, into your Azure environment. Info will just show the info, nothing special will happen there. you can put the warning, which you would see that yellow squiggly lines that you were seeing before, or you can put off, meaning that you can temporarily disable that. So depending on, again, where your team stands and what are your project requirements, choose the one that works best for you. And same is applied to others. Like you see, there's unused parameters, unused variables. You can also put some admin username, should not be literal. There are many things that you can add, and this is easy to add. As you see, each of them is actually comes as a combination. And if you want to add a new one, let's say you said these are the options that you can choose from, okay? And you just need to put the warning there and it will just start working. And let me take this out. And another Bicep config is that you can use private modules in order to bring the code that your organization, your team approved. You can use for that Azure container registries. That's where you define your module aliases and your registries where you want to bring the code. Okay, but more about that later on. Okay, let me go back and see. Okay, we have a demo regarding the parent-child resources. Let's look at that. It's if you want to see this demo, you would need to come to the file and navigate into the, let me see, it's in the samples here, okay? In the samples on the left side, if you go to the number 14, okay? Let describe what it is. So first of all, this is the, how many? There are like 50 lines of code, and what it does, it actually takes our understanding to the next level. So you already saw that there's a description, right? You can put there. By the way, is there any questions in the studio from people who are watching and from audience? Any questions, Ivan or Hugo?
Hugo.
No? All right. Let me know like if there's anything. Just ping me, please. All right. So where we were here at deploy child parent scenarios. So here we already saw this is the description, how to set parameter. So the thing that you see here is, for example, if you want to make sure that each time you deploy your resources, and let's say it is not production, you are still in development or staging phase where you have some flexibility, and you want to make sure you can redeploy the things with different names, especially with the storage name, which needs to be unique, right? If it is not unique, your deployment will just fail. So you can use this combination of unique string generation from resource group ID, okay, based on which resource group it is going to be deployed. Next, we have here deployment region, and what you can do is you can use this function called resource group to make sure that whichever resource group this deployment is going to happen from is going to use that resource group location. For example, if your resource group is created in West US, it will pick up West US and make sure that your Azure region, Azure resource is deployed to the West US location where your Azure resource group is actually created. Okay, and next we have here another description, a list of container names. We want to create these container names inside our Azure storage account. Okay, so we want to create the storage account and then give we know that our storage account name will start with LATAM, okay, and then there will be some unique string, maybe some numbers and letters. They're all going to be lowercase because that's what the storage account requires. Next, we have a parent storage account resource, okay, which is going to use that auto-generated storage account name. Deployment region is defined in parameters here, right? And if you forget that, one way is you can right-click and say go to the, let me see where it is. Should be somewhere here. Go to definition, and it will bring you jump back. It's a nice Visual Studio feature, Visual Studio Code, and it is there. Okay, so let's. Okay, and next, actually, once it is created, the storage account, it's on the standard geo-redundant storage, and you can change that, of course. All right, and next is actually option one. So what option one does is it's going to add a new container with the name data log. All right, and in order to add that, it's a child. This is not a child resource, right? Or is the child resource? Let's look at it. So it's basically taking the existing my storage container, which is not defined, okay, and then says that, hey, we create a data log container there, but make sure that the parent storage account service is actually belongs to this my storage blob service. And what is my storage blob service? It's defined here. It's basically a blob service of our storage account that we generated first, right? So we creating a storage account, then we creating a storage blob service within our account, and then within that account, we are making sure that we have internal container called internal container. Just keep the naming simple here. And finally, once we have it, we are actually going to deploy this list from our container names that we define in the beginning of file and get them all added into the into this container that's actually using the storage account name from the blob service. Okay, it's going to be the same storage account name but with all containers. So what we should get here, we should get actually a data log container created, and we should get these container names created here. All right. Okay, let's do that, guys. Let's give it a try and run this. Okay, are you up for that? Before running this, okay, this code, let me make sure everybody is aware. You can actually use these demo scripts that I created here on the left side, okay, if you are using the CLI to deployment. And how you can do that is basically you can follow this, okay. For example, you can right click and say run inline terminal, and it will tell us what's the subscription where it's going to be deployed. All right, cool. Because we are getting less in time, let me jump back to our demo here on the, okay, this is the demo where we want to be, and let me take this back. So what we are going to do in order to deploy this, first we want to create a resource group, right? And then within that resource group, we want to deploy this file, which is our Azure Bicep file that creates storage account and containers in it. Let's do that. So in order to do that, first I said we need to create a storage account, resource group, sorry. And I'm going to create this resource group, call it resource group parent child, and it's going to be in EastUS. Before doing this creation, it's important to show you something, which is going to be my subscription where I'm going to deploy it. All right. And as you see in this subscription, there is only this, how many? There's, we see like 5 resource groups, right? So let's, so we should get a new one here. And that new one is going to be resource group parent child. Let's enter. Okay. Of course, before use that, make sure that you can run. So it's actually run successfully. And if I would go back to my Azure and refresh it, you see it's there. But you can also use your command line, right? You don't have to go there and look at that. You can just say AZ group show. Okay, let me find that. AZ group actually list all your Azure resource groups. As you see here in the command, it will list all the resource groups, and here you see that resource group parent child is created. Next, we want to deploy this file, right? So to deploy this file, you would want to make sure that you run this script that I'm going to bring. AZ deployment. Let me make it a little bigger here. AZ deployment. Okay. A group create. So we are going to use the same resource group name as you saw, and this is the location of the file. And here you have a -c at the end. So that -c actually means that it's a conditional deployment, meaning that we want to see, what will change in our environment when we are deploying this new Azure Storage account with containers in it. Let's do that. Press enter. If you don't put -c, that pre-flight validation that we talked about, it's not going to happen. It's just going to try to deploy it right away. So let's do that. conditional change. So it's saying that, hey, there's a new version already there, okay, and you can use AZ Bicep upgrade to do that. I'll try it probably after the demo. Let's run this. And so while this thing is running, first, it's not gonna apply it right away. It's going to first run this dash C. And what you see actually is all the change, right? The ones which are in green are create. So it's going to create the storage account name with Latam in the beginning. Then it will take the blob service from there and create the data log, right? That's what we see here. Then we'll create the inputs container. It will create the logs container, outputs containers, a lot of containers here. Do you want to do that? Yes. Let's press yes here and press enter. So now actual deployment is started. Okay, so while this actual deployment is starting, you see this yellow thing saying there's a linter configuration in Bicep config. That's, the one that I just showed you. You remember, guys? So here, if you scroll to the Bicep config JSON, this is the JSON that's saying that there's a config file, and based on that, we are going to, customize your deployment. So while this deployment is going on, let's go back to our slides because we are short on time here. But I think it's finished actually. So it says it's finished, which is cool, and we can double check that, okay, by listing all the storage accounts here. You see this is the nice feature of Azure Storage Account in Azure CLI, where you can list them and look at the names. And we should see Latam, something that starts with Latam. Here it is. And this is the storage account which we should see. And if we actually open the Azure portal, which is here, and go to the resource group where it should be, parent child, and then we see here, it's here. And if you look at containers, we see that all of them are actually here. If you remember, we were expecting these output logs from that list of the container names, correct? And this was a separate container that have to be there for deployment. So we are done with our second demo, maybe. Let's move forward. Next, actually, productivity tips. So I kind of glanced into some of them, but I will show you how you can actually use right-click deployment using the Visual Studio Code. So you don't, if you forget how to deploy it using the scripts, you can actually use that wizard for your Bicep file deployment. Then you can have Bicep visualizer, code snippets, and auto-generated parameters in Visual Studio Code. Let's look at that. But before doing that, you want to make sure that if it doesn't appear on your environment, which it should if you have the latest, you want to make sure that you go to your extensions, okay, in the Visual Studio Code, and in the Bicep, you actually enable it. Then it will come up, okay? And you want to make sure your Azure account is there. Okay, let's look at that. And Azure Bicep Visualizer, I'm going to show that one as well before jumping back here, okay? So let's go back there and look at that visualizer thing. So with it was 7 deployment with parameters. So with Azure Bicep Visualizer, let's say you have inherited a Visual Studio. In your Visual Studio Code, you have this ARM template, or it can be also Bicep code, which is pretty long, but this is actually not as long as it should be. Why? Because this is using the modules. For example, if you want to reference an existing application service declaration, then this is the link basically saying that, hey, go and look into this code within this repo. So we have here modules app service.bicep. Same thing actually exists here if we go to the modules folder and look at app service Bicep. This is the one that where we should go actually, right? So it exists. So just to prove the concept, I'm going to come back to the file and say navigate me to this Bicep file, which is basically we are reusing app service Bicep file while creating these 7-deploy modules. And here we go. We went back to that file. It's actually creating some neat features here, which is your application service plan and then the app itself, right? Which is actually referencing your app service plan. If you ever deployed web apps in Azure, you know that you need to have Azure service plan first, and then you can deploy your web app instance, which is going to use your Azure service plan. That's what it is about, okay? And to show that to you, if you want to visualize that, because you are new to Azure, you can come here on the right and click on this link, on this icon, all right? And then it will visualize that to you that this is your app service plan and this is your web app. However, if you forget that or it doesn't come up, you can also right click, and here you would see that. Let me see if it is visible here, visualizer, and deploy, generate, insert. Yeah, here it is, open Bicep visualizer, and then it will open a separate window and you would have the same view. Okay, so like you can use the navigation, whichever works best for you. I'm going to close this at the moment. And here it is. Now we are going to visualize this again, this time using the open Bicep visualizer from here. And you said this is a, much more resources, dozens of resources here. We have 1, 2, 3, 4 resource groups, each of them full of resources, and one of them deploying the virtual machine. This is the app service. We have storage account. We have Cosmos DB. We have a lot of things here. So, but this is pretty compact code because what we see here is just the 86 lines of code. If you try to do the same thing in ARM templates, and I'm going to show you what it will look like, it would be much longer to maintain. So let's build this Bicep file. Again, when we build this Bicep file, what will happen is actually it's going to create this .json, ARM template for it. And here it is. So we get the Bicep file here, which has metadata, then it has parameters, a number of them, resource groups. So if you scroll down here, you see it's much more lines of code, much more maintenance, and it is almost like 700 lines of code here. Almost 700 lines of code, which you can do the same thing with ease of clean understanding using this just Bicep code, where you, instead of 700 lines of code managing, you have just close to 90 lines of code. So it's up to you what to choose, but I choose Bicep language because it will make my life easier and maintenance of this much easier. And finally, because we are have very little time left here, I'm going, let me see what's next here. There was other demo slated with this automating the GitHub workflow. And what it is, I'll just walk you from the place where it is so you can try it on your own, okay? Because just creating resources with right click, it's okay when you're learning, but for production, if you want to do that in your workplace, you want to automate that. You want to put some type of pipeline. And here's an example how you can do that with GitHub workflow. So to look at that example, I'm going to bring again my go to this GitHub repo, and here scroll down to the Learn Bicep folder here on the right. And by the way, if you didn't check it out yet, please check both of them and give stars or like it or fork it, basically use it, and plus share back. I mean, put your own inputs there. So here in VS Code, you would see that we have a pipeline set. No, that's not the setting. Sorry, let me go back here. So in terms of pipeline, it's in the workflows, of course. We navigate back and you will see that we have this deployment YAML and main deployment YAML. So this YAML defines the steps, how to define where to grab the code. Of course, in order to set it up, you would have to make sure you create your secrets, you create your principal services in Azure before doing that. But there is a step-by-step explanation in the article which I created in the if you look into the cloudmarathoner.com, you would find it there. So we have this pipeline here. If you look at the actions, so that where the actions are deployed, and we have deployment actions where it merge the changes and make the deployment, and we have this scan which actually does the security scanning of the code. So all these is actually there, and I will go back from where we left. So just go and check it out. It's all there, okay? And again, it's here. You just need to go and look at the GitHub Learn Bicep GitHub repo. All right. And please contribute back if you see anything that you want to add back or any suggestions. Open an issue, make sure it's there. I see there's one issue at smoke test, but probably it's created by me. I would have to work on it. All right, let's go back and wrap it up here. So let me ask again, is there any questions in the studio? Ivan or Hugo, do you see anything, guys?
No questions, Erkan. All good.
Okay. All right. Okay. If no questions, then next is, of course, let's wrap it up. So what we covered, we look into what is Azure Bicep, its relation with ARM templates, what are the benefits and what you want to do with that. We looked into some productivity tips, how to make sure that you can use them and benefit from them, either in the Visual Studio Code itself or using the command line interface to interact. Then updates on Azure Bicep, we didn't cover that much, but all those updates are in the GitHub repo of Azure Bicep team. And demos, we looked into certain demos to make sure we have some hands-on understanding of this technology as well. Again, in terms of resources, here's a QCR code that you can use. On the left, you have this Learn Bicep GitHub repo that I use for the demos and to bring you the information, the workflow pipelines and everything that you saw in the demo. Then here's the first look video course on LinkedIn that you can check it out. You have the Bicep project GitHub, which is Microsoft Bicep project, where you can actually see the latest versions and what's included in them. And of course, Azure Bicep GitHub repo. That's the one where we have a wealth of information from 6 contributors. It's a community managed GitHub repo where people put the information about to help others to learn Azure Bicep. Okay, that's it. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, actually, the Jira. Thank you, this event, Jira Online Speakers for Latin 2022. It was a pleasure to present for all of you. And again, check out my profile, get connected with me on LinkedIn, and follow me on Twitter. And thecloudmarathon.com is the place where I blog and try to share information about Microsoft Azure. That's all on my end. I hope we've wrapped up on time. As this is the end of the presentation. Thank you, everyone, again.
Thank you very much, Erkan.
Thank you, everyone.
Hugo, ¿estás ahí?
Yes, sir. How are you doing?